Welcome to the threshold of deeper understanding. Let us begin, not with noise, but with the kind of silence that speaks volumes to those who have ears for the soul. There exists in this world a silence that is not tranquil, but scarred. It does not bloom from peace, but from pain too vast for words. It is the quiet of a person who has carried more than their share of emotional weight, whose wounds are not visible but echo through everything left unsaid. This silence is not a plea for attention, but a shield, a sacred pause forged in the fire of human hurt. The soul that has walked through emotional fire does not return untouched. No spirit journeys through the dark night and comes back the same. It returns quieter, more discerning, more guarded, not because it has lost its capacity for love, but because it now understands how love, when mishandled, can cut deeper than any blade. So it learns to hide, not in bitterness but in instinct, not in coldness but in self-preservation. And yet, this withdrawal is often misread. The world may call it aloofness, accuse you of being too serious, too intense, too much for their comfort. But Jung saw through that projection. He understood the psychology of pain. He wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." The silent ones, those who have suffered too deeply, carry this unconscious within them, like a shadow stitched to every step. The pain we do not confront becomes the architecture of our personality. It shapes our tone of voice, our startle response, and our emotional distance. We flinch, not from disrespect, but from memories that live in the body. We shut down not because we don't feel, but because we feel too much. And no one taught us what to do with that tenderness. If you've ever stared into a mirror and felt disconnected from the reflection, as if the person looking back at you is wearing your skin, but not your essence, know this: you are not broken. You are not beyond repair. You are wearing a mask that once saved you. The strong one, the calm one, the smiling one. It is not a lie. It is a legacy of your survival. That mask held you together when the world threatened to tear you apart. But survival is not the end of the story. Healing begins when we slowly, gently dare to take it off. This article is a deep psychological journey inspired by the philosophy of Carl Jung, illuminating the hidden behaviors, emotional reactions, and quiet struggles of those who have endured too much. Through Jung's lens, we see that silence is not coldness, but a protective instinct born from deep emotional history. Patterns like withdrawal, people-pleasing, chronic doubt, or the inability to trust are not flaws, they're scars. Jung called them complexes, inner knots of feeling and memory that govern us from below the surface, repeating themselves until we finally have the courage to meet them face to face. And ultimately, this journey is not about becoming someone new. It is about returning to yourself, more whole, more awake, through the profound and sacred process of individuation. Jung called it the persona, the mask we present to the world not out of deceit, but necessity. It is the carefully crafted face we wear to fit into society, to be accepted, to avoid further wounds. But what begins as protection can quietly become prison. The danger does not lie in having a mask, but in forgetting there is a true face beneath it, a self untouched by performance, aching to be seen. People who have suffered deeply do not merely construct emotional walls. They create entire inner universes, rich with memory, silence, and symbolic meaning. These inner worlds become sanctuaries when life outside becomes too sharp, too loud, too unpredictable. And yet, those around them often misread this retreat. They say, "She's distant," or "He's too much in his head," failing to see that this withdrawal is not about arrogance or detachment. It is about self-preservation. When your heart has been pierced enough times, you learn to hide, not to deceive, but to survive. These individuals are not unreachable, they are simply cautious. Underneath the quiet exterior is not coldness, but a soul that trembles at the thought of being shattered again. They fear that if they soften, they will dissolve. If they hope, they will be disappointed. That if they open, they will be left exposed to the very winds that once broke them. Jung taught that pain is not punishment, it is communication from the unconscious. He said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." But the tragedy of modern life is that no one teaches us how to listen to pain. We are taught to ignore it, to mask it with productivity, to numb it with distractions, to rationalize it with logic. But pain that is not honored becomes a ghost. It doesn't leave. It becomes a shadow that follows us into every relationship, every silence, every time we react more than we intend to. We don't just carry pain, we become shaped by it. We tell ourselves we've moved on because we can function. We go to work, we smile, we say the right things, we laugh at the right moments. But beneath that surface performance is often a soul still stuck in the very moment it fractured. And while the world sees someone strong, someone resilient, what they do not see is the emotional knot forming in the unconscious, the unprocessed ache, the echo of abandonment, the tremor of unspoken grief. Jung called this the formation of a complex, an inner knot, a bundle of unresolved emotion and memory that gains a life of its own in the unconscious mind. These complexes do not fade with time. They repeat like a haunting song beneath our daily lives, until we are finally courageous enough to stop, turn inward, and face them with compassion instead of avoidance. This is not weakness. This is the deeper architecture of the human soul. We build patterns to protect ourselves, but healing requires us to dismantle what no longer serves us. To take off the mask, not in rebellion, but in reclamation. To recognize that the persona may have kept us safe, but it was never meant to be the whole of who we are. Behind it lives the part of us still longing for truth, still craving intimacy, still worthy of being known, not for what we project, but for who we truly are. So, this journey inward is not about abandoning the persona entirely, it is about integrating it. Letting it become a tool of conscious expression, rather than an unconscious shield. Because only when we honor the pain and examine the complex beneath it, can we begin the sacred work of individuation, the return to the self we were always meant to become. Imagine, for a moment, a child who grew up not in chaos, but in absence, not invisible because someone silenced them, but because no one truly saw them. No one mirrored their emotions. No one paused to understand their inner world. They didn't vanish with a scream. They vanished quietly, day by day, in a house full of people who looked but did not perceive. That kind of invisibility leaves a mark far more confusing than conflict. It creates an ache that doesn't even have a name. That child doesn't forget. They carry that echo into adulthood, not in memories, but in behaviors. They become the adult who overanalyzes every silence, who rereads messages, who fears that withdrawal means rejection, not because they are needy, but because absence reminds them of the emotional vacuum they once lived in. It reactivates the same inner room where they once sat, waiting to be noticed, waiting to matter. So when you see someone seemingly overreacting, take a breath before rushing to label them. You may not be witnessing their reaction to the present moment. You may be watching them confront a ghost from the past. A ghost that looks, sounds, or feels eerily similar to you. Maybe it was your delayed reply, your silence, your distance. It might resemble something ancient to them, a familiar wound wearing a new face. This is not emotional instability. This is a survival instinct. The body remembers. The nervous system keeps score. Jung understood this sacred terrain. He reminded us that we cannot judge another's path by our own shoes. He said, "The shoe that fits one person pinches another." There is no recipe for living that suits all cases. To truly witness the behavior of someone who has suffered is to step onto sacred psychological ground. You do not walk in with judgment. You enter with reverence. Each reaction is a doorway. Each fear is a symbol. Some people become relentless caretakers, not because they have space to give, but because no one ever taught them how to receive. They pour love out like an apology. They fix others, not because they are whole, but because fixing is the only way they know how to avoid the brokenness inside themselves. And society praises them for their kindness, their strength and their emotional reliability. But inside, they're exhausted. They smile while drowning. They rescue others, hoping someone will finally notice they've been silently asking to be saved. That is not love. That is the abandonment of the self disguised as generosity. Others become lone wolves, proudly self-sufficient, fiercely independent, emotionally unreachable, not because they dislike intimacy, but because their early years taught them that no one comes. So they stopped asking, they stopped depending. They do it all alone, not from pride, but from pain. Because the need is to risk disappointment, and to risk disappointment is to reopen a wound that has never been fully closed. You'll also find those who live in the mind, thinkers, strategists, intellectuals. But beneath that logic and brilliance is often an emotional wound too dangerous to touch. For them, to feel is to risk falling apart. So they construct fortresses of analysis, reasoning their way around the pain. Jung warned of this. He said, overthinking is not always insight. It can be armor, a wall of thought so thick that no emotion can break through. There are others who numb in more covert ways, with constant busyness, with food, with routines of perfection, not because they lack discipline, but because they lack inner safety. When the inner world is chaotic, the outer world becomes a place they try to control. Clean homes, rigid schedules, ideal performances, these are not always signs of order. Sometimes they are the outer expression of inner fear, a subconscious attempt to create predictability where life once offered none. And then there are those who simply vanish. They are physically present, but emotionally unreachable. You speak to them, but their eyes are distant, their presence faint. They've learned to disappear without leaving. This too is not failure, it is intelligence. The psyche, wise and ancient, discovered that when the body could not escape pain, the mind could. Dissociation is not a flaw, it is the soul's emergency exit. A quiet gift of survival, allowing a person to remain in a world that once overwhelmed them. When you encounter such people, resist the urge to fix or label. Instead, understand that behind their behavior lies a history, written in silence. Their reactions are symbols. Their pain has a language. Healing, as Jung taught, begins not by rejecting these defenses, but by honoring them as remnants of a soul that found a way to survive. That is not weakness. That is sacred resilience. So what do we do with all of this? How do we move forward once we recognize that the behaviors we once judged, our own or others, are not flaws but echoes? We begin by choosing a new way of seeing. We stop judging and we start witnessing. We replace the impulse to label with the courage to understand. Every reaction, every retreat, every overcorrection is not just a moment of strangeness. It is a story in disguise, a chapter from a personal mythology shaped by sorrow, silence, and survival. Jung's greatest gift to us was not a prescription for how to live, but a language to interpret what we live through. He gave us a map that doesn't erase the pain, but helps us read it. He showed us that our reactions are messages from the unconscious, that our shadows are not enemies but guides, and that the places where we hurt the most are not the end, they are the doorway. Pain, when examined with reverence, becomes the threshold to awakening. When you have suffered deeply, love changes form. It stops appearing as a dream and begins to resemble a test, not because you have grown cold, but because you have learned. You have learned through distance, through broken trust, through the hollow ring of words that once felt sincere. You have learned that not everyone who says, "I care," truly means it. So now, when someone new enters your life, you don't meet them with the wide-eyed wonder you once gave so freely. You meet them with quiet eyes and a heart layered with questions you cannot yet name. You don't distrust them out of bitterness. You assess them out of instinct, because now safety precedes closeness. The soul that has once been pierced moves more slowly. It watches before it opens. It listens before it speaks. It guards its light until it feels warmth. not just promises. And so, you scan, you notice, you observe the space between their words. You sense the energy behind their tone, the subtle shifts in their story, the cracks that others might overlook. You don't accuse, you don't attack, but inwardly you mark the moment, because you've learned that small fractures are often how the bigger breaks begin. A missed detail, a casual inconsistency, a faint hesitation. These are the things that once unraveled you, and now you refuse to dismiss them. You feel it in your body first, an inner knowing. Your gut tightens, your breath shortens, your chest pulls inward like a quiet warning. And you've made yourself a promise this time. You will listen, because last time you didn't. You wanted to believe the best. You ignored the whisper, explained away the red flag, and silenced your own intuition in the name of hope. But now, you've matured into someone who knows better. Not more cynical, but more discerning. You have become both the lover and the protector. You do not close the door completely, but you do not fling it open either. You open just enough to feel the air, to sense if the presence is nourishing or draining. You love in careful doses, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. You've learned that to give your whole heart too soon is not romance, it is self-abandonment. Even when someone smiles, even when their words seem perfect, you listen for what is missing. You listen to what is unspoken, because now you know that silence can carry the loudest truths. When they say, "I'm fine," you don't just hear the words, you feel the emotional climate behind them. You pay attention not only to what is said, but to how it is lived. And this is not paranoia. It is intuition refined by experience. It is the soul, speaking through the body, protecting itself from the repetition of heartbreak. So you wait, you listen, you trust your inner compass, even when a part of you wants to dive in, to trust, to believe again. The wiser part of you holds your hand gently and whispers, "Let's see first." And now you honor that voice, because you've learned the hard way what happens when you don't. You've realized that true healing is not about erasing the past, but about evolving your response to it. And that kind of self-honoring is not a wall, it's a boundary, a sacred boundary, built not from fear, but from reverence for your own soul. And perhaps there are days when you wish things felt easier. You wish love could arrive like the stories promised, weightless, effortless, flowing like water over smooth stones. You long to surrender to it, to rest in the arms of another without hesitation, without premonition. But for you, love does not float. It carries weight. It arrives cloaked in memory, trailing echoes of the past. Love brings history. It brings the ghosts of moments that shaped you when you were most unguarded. So you love, but with caution. You give, but with awareness. You walk into the connection with one hand reaching forward and the other quietly resting on the door, not because you intend to leave, but because you've had to leave before. Because survival taught you to never stop scanning for the moment when everything changes. And even when it's good, even when it's kind, a part of you remains alert, ready for the silence, ready for the shift, ready for the space where closeness once was. This is not brokenness. This is wisdom. This is the intelligence of a heart that remembers. But oh, how tiring it can be to constantly read the energy in a room, to double-check every tone, every pause, to analyze the gap between what someone says and what you feel they mean. You're not looking for flaws. You're looking for safety. You're not trying to play games. You're trying to feel the ground beneath your feet before you exhale. You want to trust. You long to rest. But for someone who has known the weight of false promises and sudden goodbyes, rest feels like a risk. So instead, you test, not as a trap, but as a prayer. You ask small questions, not to expose deception, but to feel their soul. Will they reach for me when I go quiet? Will they stay close when I'm distant? Will they still care when I'm not easy to love? You're not asking for perfection, you never were. You're asking for presence, for steadiness, for someone who does not flinch at the sight of your shadows. Because when someone has seen you, truly seen you, they will not be startled by your depth. But not everyone has the depth to meet you in return. So you stay silent with your doubts, yet internally the questions rise like waves. Can I trust you? Will you tell me the truth? Are you here for me, or for how I reflect back your needs? You become attuned to what others miss, a hesitation before they speak, a change in their tone, a flicker in their eyes. And while others may laugh it off, you feel it like a signal in your body. Because you know now that pain doesn't always enter loudly. Sometimes it arrives softly, dressed in charm, disguised in kind words and warm gestures. And your body knows. It remembers. So maybe you don't confront it immediately. Maybe you offer the benefit of the doubt. But something inside you begins to close. Not with anger, not with noise, but with a quiet internal shift. A door, once slightly open, begins to seal, because your nervous system knows the shape of betrayal. It recognizes the smallest signs. And when you've been hurt by someone you once loved, your system never forgets. So now, even a harmless, seeming small distortion hurts deeper than anyone realizes. Not because the content of the lie was devastating, but because of what it reactivates. Something old, something sacred. A memory where trust was fractured. And in that moment, what aches is not just the present. It's the past returning to ask, will you protect me this time? So, how do you move forward when your heart has become a landscape of sacred caution? You move slowly. You thaw gently. You peel away the ice, layer by layer, watching not only what someone says, but who they become when they believe you're not watching. Do they check in when you grow quiet? Do they listen to your words? Do they hold space not only for your light, but for your vulnerability? That's how you know, not in grand gestures, but in subtle consistency. You pay attention to what is said in silence, to how someone shows up, not just when love is easy, but when you're difficult, distant, guarded. That is where trust is built. Not through perfection, but through presence. And when they lie, even about something small, it can feel like an earthquake to a heart that remembers, because you're not reacting to the lie itself, you're responding to everything it brings with it. The echo, the pattern, the warning. And in those moments, the journey is not about blaming them. It is about turning inward, asking the pain, what are you trying to show me? What are you still holding? What is this moment here to teach me about what I've survived? That is the paradox of pain. It does not exist to destroy you. It exists to remind you, to return you to the self that once felt lost. And when you meet that pain with reverence, when you stop trying to silence it and begin to listen to it, something ancient inside you begins to soften. The grip loosens, the memory reshapes. Slowly, you begin to reclaim your power, not by forgetting, but by remembering with wisdom. Those who have walked through the deepest valleys of suffering often carry a strange and luminous gift. They become mirrors. Mirrors are not of the surface, but of the soul. They see what others overlook. They hear what others do not say. They sense energy shifts, the pauses between words, the quiet ache in a smile. Their sensitivity is not a weakness, it is an awakening. But if they have not yet begun the journey of healing, that gift can become a burden. They absorb the emotions of others, like rain into dry earth, losing themselves in the process. They become healers who forget they too are bleeding. They reach out, mend, soothe, fix, while quietly abandoning their own unmet needs. True healing is not about always being the strong one. It is not about proving your independence, achieving inner peace, or reaching some mystical state of perfect balance. It is about wholeness. And wholeness, as Jung taught, means embracing the entirety of your being, even the parts that make others uncomfortable. It means turning toward the aspects of yourself that you were told were too much, your grief, your anger, your fear, and choosing not to exile them anymore. There is no shame in having built walls. The only sadness is when we forget why we needed them. Healing begins not with shame, but with remembrance. Not with erasing the past, but with reclaiming the parts of us that got buried beneath survival. Jung called this sacred process individuation, the unfolding of the true self, the slow and conscious integration of all the fragmented pieces into one authentic whole. And this journey, he said, always passes through the shadowlands of your own psyche. It requires courage to sit with your sorrow, to honor the rage you swallowed, to let the longing speak. It demands that you descend into the places where your truest self was silenced. But you are not broken. You are becoming. You are not something to fix. You are a sacred story that is still unfolding. When you begin to listen to your pain without fear, something alchemical happens. The wound stops festering and becomes a teacher. The shadows soften. The inner child, the part of you who waited for someone to come back, who hoped someone would see, stay, and speak the words you needed, begins to exhale. And in that moment of safety, you do not forget what happened. You learn to carry it differently, with tenderness, with honor. You stop pretending you're unaffected, and instead you say with courage, "This still hurts. But I'm here. I'm not running anymore." Those who have suffered deeply often emerge as the most gentle, compassionate souls, not because they are weak, but because they know what it means to walk barefoot through emotional fire. They don't seek to harm, they seek to understand. But even the ones who understand the most still need to be reminded. You deserve to be understood too. So if you are one of them, if your reactions sometimes surprise even you, if your quiet is mistaken for coldness, if your distance is really a cry for safety, please know this: you are not too much. You are layered. You are deep. You are a soul who kept going even when the map was lost and the light had gone out. And now, perhaps, it is time to come home, not by force, not by performance, but by love. Real healing is not a destination, it is a return to the self that existed before the world forgot how to hold you. A return to the inner sanctuary where your truth still waits. Welcome back, beloved one. Welcome to the Wisdom Gate. This is the place where your story is honored, where your pain is not too loud, where your soul finally remembers what it always knew. It has never been alone. If something within this message stirred you, if even a single word mirrored your inner experience, I invite you to let your voice be heard in the comments. Have you encountered that soul whose presence feels like home, or are you still walking the sacred path back to yourself? Your story, however unfinished, may become the lantern in someone else's darkness, the very sign they didn't know they were searching for. And if someone close to you is silently struggling with the illusion that love must hurt, that self-abandonment is the price of connection, or that they are unworthy of peace, share this video with them. Help me reach the ones who need to remember. Real love does not demand that we shrink. True connection does not ask for sacrifice of the soul. And the most vital union we will ever form is the one with our own inner truth. Before you go, I invite you to subscribe and activate the notification bell. Here, in this space, we journey beneath the surface of things, exploring the hidden architecture of the psyche, the whispers of the unconscious, and how every relationship is but a mirror reflecting our personal evolution. If there's a theme, a question, or a wound you would like us to explore in future videos, leave it below. This space breathes because of you. Your voice is not only welcome here, it is essential. Thank you for showing up, not just to this video, but to your inner work, to the sacred labor of remembering who you truly are. And always remember this: when the right person appears, your soul will know, not through fear, but through peace. But until that moment, let your most intimate relationship be the one you cultivate within. That is the foundation, that is the home. And from that wholeness, all things real are born. Until next time, I'll see you on the path.